Welcome to a special virtual edition of the Skeptics track at Dragoncon. And now, let's start the show.
Hello, welcome to the virtual streaming Skeptic track. Appreciate your joining us today. I'm Dr. Angie. I'm the Assistant Track Director. I appreciate Mark Ditzler and Calico Cove Studios for having us filming straight out of their studios. And today with us we have Celestia Ward, who is a cartoonist, caricaturist, woman about town, has podcasting, editing, just a really wonderful all-round person. So welcome to Dragoncon.
Thank you very much, Angie. I appreciate the opportunity. Should I just launch right into it here?
Absolutely, go right for it.
Well, my name is Celestia Ward, and I'm one of the co-hosts, along with Ben Bradford and Pasquale Romero, of Squaring the Strange, a podcast where we talk about weird stuff and why people love weird stuff and why people believe weird stuff and why people make weird stuff up. And wow, we do not have any shortage of content. There's a lot of weird stuff out there. Now, I am a cartoonist by trade, as in I earn my living that way. For the past 15 years, I have run Two Heads Studios out here in Las Vegas. And I'm not one of the famous cartoonists. I didn't trademark Garfield. I don't have a syndicated strip. But I'm a workaday, cartoonist that makes her living doing live caricature at events, spot illustrations here and there, and occasionally I did illustrate and co-create Astounding Tales of Science, which was a webcomic a few years ago. I believe it's still up at professorsciencecomic.com, if anybody's curious. And I have a strong interest in communicating science and skepticism through comics and cartooning, and how cartooning and comics enter our brain, and how that differs from, say, reading a magazine article or seeing live action video footage. So this talk is going to be what cartooning taught me about skepticism, not what cartoons taught me about skepticism. So if y'all are interested in hearing about Scooby-Doo, that'll be a different talk. We'll do that another day. Now, my background is kind of unique in that I'm a working cartoonist who got her start in academic editing at a university press. The first 10 years out of college, I worked at the Johns Hopkins University Press, and I copy edited manuscripts, ranging from books on prostate cancer to Jacques Derrida. So I had this sort of split education. By day, I was Miss Academic Editor, and by night, I would be doing street cartoons with other caricature artists at the ballpark or in tourist traps. So it was really kind of a dual path, and I'm glad I had the opportunity to do that, because a lot of times this path, although they were two paths, they seemed kind of parallel. I didn't go to an art school per se, but I was lucky enough to have a brilliant cartooning 101 professor, Tom Chalkley. I'll give him a shout out. He's done some work for the New Yorker. He's still very active, drawing mean little pictures of Donald Trump almost on a daily basis. He introduced me to the genius of Zippy the Pinhead and comics scholar Scott McCloud, and his ability to distill sort of how comics and sequential art enter our brains and what they do to our psychology when we read them. And in the meantime, when I went to college, I minored in psychology, and I was learning about sensation and perception and our rods and cones and everything that can go wrong between the rods and cones and our understanding of what we're seeing. So it was a fun sort of parallel study as I drew and learned about street art and cartooning and the rough and tumble carnival arts, and also the world of academia. But this is not going to be an academic lecture. No, we're at Dragoncon, or rather, Dragoncon is at us this year. So for the next hour, we're just going to have a chat. You're my guests in my home. We're going to have a fireside chat here. There.
I feel warmer already.
Yes, and I'm just going to try and keep it simple. I don't have slides. I have a few visual aids, but we're going to keep it fairly simple and streamlined, which is a principle of good cartooning. So, speaking of cartooning, this is going to be a group event here. Everybody grab a pencil or a pen and a piece of paper. Something you have nearby. It can be the back of an envelope. It can be, rip a page out of one. Well, don't rip a page out of one of your James Randi or Carl Sagan books. But, rip a page out of one of your Gwyneth Paltrow books. And I want you to draw a bicycle.
Rip all of the pages out of your Gwyneth Paltrow books.
Yeah. I want you to draw a bicycle. Don't Google bicycle. Don't look up how to draw a bicycle. Don't pull your bicycle out of the garage. I just want you from memory to draw a quick little cartoon of a bicycle. And take your time to do that. We'll get to it later. Just set it aside. Now, on to what cartooning has taught me about skepticism. All right, first, I'm going to talk about observation. Now, observation is, of course, a vital part of the scientific process, but it's also key to any type of art. And the process of observing, especially in the framework of an art lesson, which I think all kids should have, they're cutting arts education everywhere. And we skeptics who are anxious to get critical thinking taught from an early age, there's no better way to teach a kid critical thinking and the limits of their observation than to get them a drawing lesson. The process of drawing something, of observing, teaches you the limits of your own perception and observational abilities. It's not always pleasant to learn this, to learn how limited these are. And I think that's why many people, except for the most rugged or a little off-kilter mentally, stick with it and make it their career. But in my job, I hear constantly, daily, oh, I can't draw. Oh, I tried to draw. Oh, I can't even draw a stick figure. And what I hear when people tell me that is, I tried once, and then I learned I'm not good at observing, and so I gave up because it was hard and it was frustrating. And I choose to believe that drawing is something magical that you can do, but I can't even draw a stick figure. So anybody who's trying to draw a portrait or a still life or a plein air painting, you name it, is going to look at the source, observing it, and then look at your attempt to recreate it, look at the paper or the canvas, and you go back and forth, and you realize, well, crap, that's not right. And that's really what art education is. That really is what being an artist is. It's learning, it's doing this 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times, and every single time trying to get it to look right. And as you go through this process, I'm going to get a little introspective here. You start realizing, wow, I have never really looked at the skin of an orange. I mean, and what kind of a dummy am I? These oranges, I've eaten an orange every day, and I've never really looked at the skin. And there's kind of an imposter syndrome thing that goes through your head psychologically. You're like, wait, everybody else knows what an orange looks like, right? I mean, other people are aware of exactly how the bumps and variations of the skin catch the light, but I don't know how. I can't replicate this. Oh, I'm a failure. And so working in art is really having this feeling of humility, this humbling experience over and over and over again. And it's not always fun, but once you kind of accept it and go with it, you're like, okay, I'm just learning about the limits of my perceptual abilities. And again, as a cartoonist, you don't just draw a still life of an orange. You have to draw everything from teacups to toasters to bicycles, and you're constantly learning, oh, I don't know what the branches of an oak tree look like. I don't know what the anatomy of the little toe on the foot really looks like. I don't know what the color of a goldfish is. I mean, the simple answer would be gold, and we'll get to that later. But to really know what the colors are involved when the light hits the scales of the goldfish, there's a lot of nuance there. And you can't just say gold and have that be the answer if you're trying to really improve your art skills. Now, an impressionist painter once had me stare at the snow until I saw the lavender in the snow. And it took a while, but I perceived the lavender eventually. And he was very happy. He wanted to be, I think he wanted me to become an impressionist painter. He was another friend of mine who did caricatures on the side, but he was an impressionist painter and taught impressionist painting.
Are you sure he just didn't bleach out all your rods by making you stare at a white thing for that long?
Well, come to think of it, all of his paintings are full of lavender, so he might have bleached out his cones and rods a long time ago. but so you're let me see here. So so this humility is something I'm going to be talking about, and it's something artists and cartoonists know deep in our bones, that you never really fully feel like you absolutely know what something looks like or how it works. And that, I think, is really a core tenet of skepticism. Don't think you know better than the doctors. Don't think you know better than Dr. Fauci. You might be able to look at it for a day on the internet, but these people have been looking at it for 20, 30, 50 years. And so, again, this is what cartooning has taught me about skepticism. My specific branch of cartooning, the thing I do most often, is caricature, and that's drawing human faces. And I do want to bring in this here. This is Tom Richmond's book, The Mad Art of Caricature. Anybody who is curious about how to learn, how to draw caricatures, it's a little bit of a credential brag here. I edited that book. In fact, I badgered Tom Richmond into writing it because he had some brilliant lessons on how to observe and how to train caricature artists. And rather than just publishing them in little Xeroxes, I said, Tom, if you put together a book, I'll edit it for you for free. Please write a book. And he bet me that only like 30 caricature artists that I know are going to buy this. This book is on its 11th printing. It sold almost 37,000 copies.
Wow.
So every time I see Tom, I remind him that I won that bet. So now one of the lessons that he says in here in the very beginning is he says he can teach an artist how to draw a circle. It's a simple mechanical process. But if an artist looks at a square and thinks, that's a circle, that's a much more tricky problem. And that tends to be the problem that you see in bad artists or artists that need to improve their observational skills. A drawing is about seeing, it's not about rendering. So anyway, let's talk more about observations per se here. We've got distilling observations, simplifying observations, and lying about observations. Because cartooning encompasses all three of those. I hope you see that okay. All right. Now, we've talked about taking our painting classes, doing our still lifes of our orange skin, and we're realizing that we really suck at observation. And I'm not using we in the royal sense. I'm talking about we humans. Human beings in general are really bad at observing. And the ones who think that they're really good at observing are usually the worst ones. And yes, if that sounds like Dunning-Kruger, it's because it's totally Dunning-Kruger. Working artists and cartoonists especially rely heavily on the fact that we know y'all have broken brains. We know that you're terrible at observing because we've learned how terrible we are at observing, slowly, piece by piece, drawing by drawing. So we're like, okay, now that I know that I suck at observing, I'm aware that all of you suck at observing, so how can I use that to my benefit? So I'm going to generalize here from some conversations I've had with countless artists I know. Your mileage may vary. You might know a completely different clique of artists. I don't know. But it's not absolute truth. It's what I've kind of absorbed. And if you ask these artists, what is your favorite part of a drawing? When does it seem like it's going the best? When is your favorite part? And they'll say, usually without exception, the very beginning. That's when you have some lines, you have the basic whisper of a concept, you know what's going to be there, and you can imagine the rest. And after that stage, it's just a process of screwing it up bit by bit until it's a finished product, and you wince as you give it to the client or you sell it at the gallery. As they say, a finished product, you never release a piece of art, it escapes. So, yes, invariably, you can ask an artist what they think of a final piece, and they can go, well, I missed this part up, and I missed that part up, and I screwed up down here. But when it's just the first stage with the line work, the very sketch, the whisper, the concept, the essence, you're like, okay, I like that. This is going to be good. And cartooning really takes that first stage, the rough lines, the whisper, just the hint of what you're trying to draw, and it says, done. We're going to stop there. Let the audience fill in the rest with their imagination, just like I would be doing with my imagination if this was the pre-sketch to a gigantic, fully rendered mural. Now, I'm not saying that there's certainly a lot of cartoons out there that are highly rendered, highly detailed. Little Nemo was incredible draftsmanship, and more work went into one of those Sunday strips than any mural I've seen. But for the purposes of this talk, I'm defining cartooning as a simplified way of communicating an object, a simplified drawing, a bare bones, and often these simplified bare bones drawings have millions of undersketches under there until they find the right line. And one of the premier examples of that is I'm going to show you is Al Hirschfeld.
Oh, yes.
Yes, and you can't see it in the resolution on your TV, but he's got the word Nina scrawled into the boutonniere there of George Gershwin. And one of the things he would do is hide his daughter's name once, twice, or 3 or 4 or 5 times in his artwork. And you can see it's just the whisper, the hint of a line, and just with that one line, he's conveying the motion, he's conveying the attitude, the Gershwin-ness of what made Gershwin look like Gershwin. And so Hirschfeld is one of the caricature artists that even non-caricature artists have heard of. If you're a fan of Broadway, of course you've heard of him anyway. So by simplifying, as Hirschfeld has shown us, you let your mind, or you let the viewer's mind, fill in the rest. And cartoons do this on purpose. They do this by design. It's intentional. And psychology has entire branches of study dedicated to how the brain fills in the gaps, how we fill in our blind spot, how we make assumptions without even knowing we're making assumptions. And sometimes cartoonists are aware of this. Sometimes, I'm not the only cartoonist who's interested in psychology and has taken courses in it and read up about it. Oftentimes, though, workaday cartoonists know this kind of, I don't want to say instinctually, but it's a learned thing, the way that a street magician learns how to deceive an audience. They learn how to misdirect. Same way a workaday cartoonist learns how to maximize on your broken brains. So cartoons take this burden of nuance and they place it on the audience. And as a cartoonist, you fall into the comfort of that knowledge that the viewers have brains that are just okay enough to interpret what you're drawing. And you can get as spare and as simplified as you want. And making cartoons, you can make some things that take full advantage of that. And before you know it, you're on your way to anime and chibi, and you just get more and more reduced. And I want to show you one of my favorite, very reduced, spare, bare bones comics. And that's XKCD, of course, by Randall Munroe, who was an engineer and a roboticist at NASA before he turned to the dark arts of cartooning. I'm keeping it up here because I know y'all are reading it.
I've already posted that one to my Facebook page.
Now, the XKCD is incredibly popular, certainly among scientists and skeptics. And I think specifically they have more power because of the simplified drawings in them. I can't imagine people would be sharing them as much if they were simple narratives typed out like a poem, or even if you had live photographs of little scientists talking to each other. So why is that? Why do these simplified cartoons intrigue us so and make us want to share them? Scott Adams, who I mentioned, I think, before, Tom Chalkley introduced me to his work. He's a comics scholar. I'm going to let him sort of answer that question here. This is from Scott McCloud's. Did I say Scott Adams by accident? Oh, I hope not. Scott Adams is also a cartoonist, but he's crazy woo-woo wackadoo. Not at all to be confused with Scott McCloud.
Okay, noted.
Scott McCloud.
Let the record reflect.
Yes. Scott McCloud, here's one of his pages talking about the simplification of an image. And I'll read it here for you. When we abstract an image through cartooning, we're not so much eliminating details as we are focusing on specific details. By stripping down an image to its essential meaning, an artist can amplify that meaning in a way that realistic art can't. And he goes on to talk about how cartoons, because of this abstracted simplification, can focus our attention on something more powerfully. It can get an idea across that we jump into a little bit more readily because it's universal. Let me see here. This last drawing can apply to everybody with two eyes and a mouth, which is nearly all human beings. Mm-hmm. Whereas the first one simply is, limited to a group of white Caucasian males of European ancestry. So really, it helps you more universally get your idea across. And Scott McCloud goes further. He cites media theorist Marshall McLuhan. The media is the message guy. That's that fellow. And he suggests that basic cartoons cause people to experience the message in a much more immersive way, much like your sphere of awareness changes when you're driving a car or when you're riding a bicycle. Keep those bicycle drawings handy. You're aware of the car. You're aware of the bicycle in a symbolic way in your head. You are experiencing yourself being part of the vehicle, but on your conceptual plane, not in a realistic plane, but conceptually. So simplified cartoons it's a shortcut onto your conceptual plane, if that makes sense to you. If it doesn't make sense, if I'm covering it too quickly, just make a note to check out Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, because he conveys it far better with simplified pictures that will go right to your conceptual plane. Now, with all this talk of simplified planes or simplified objects and faces, I'm sure a lot of your little skeptic brains are thinking about the word pareidolia. And that's because cartooning is completely reliant on pareidolia. None of us would be able to make a living. It's a common, seeing patterns or faces especially is one of those little mental peculiarities we are all very grateful for. And in fact, one of a very common cartooning exercise for character design is you take a bunch of shapes and you make faces out of them. Bizarre little faces, and it kind of stretches your little pareidolia playground a bit to be able to draw a little bit more extreme cartooning. And you guys, pareidolia is your playground too, but you probably don't know it because, think about it. All of you guys have got a pareidolia machine on your phones, I guarantee it, and you use it more than words sometimes, and you think it conveys a thought a lot more powerfully than writing, "What a surprise!" No, you instead click the box that just goes, and it gets your point across. So, who knew that emojis would take off and be so popular? Well, cartoonists knew that. We totally knew. So, okay, so knowing that the basic drawings and simple cartoons can successfully evoke the person represented or the object represented, we're going to go a little bit further into the rabbit hole, to the cartooning rabbit hole, and see what happens when we lie, when we don't just boil down the essence of something to a mere tracing, but we lie about it. We put a line there that's not there. We go in a direction that's not there in real life. And the word caricature kind of has a history of representing that. It's often used as a pejorative. If you see a completely unbelievable character in a movie that's just over the top villainous with a little smiting mustache twirling as you can't pay the rent, I'm going to tie you to the train tracks. That's a caricature of a villain. It's not believable. If I had a nickel for every time I heard the word caricature applied to Donald Trump, I would be a rich woman. But that meaning, that history of the art form, is hinged on the fact that caricature skates that line between exaggeration and outright lying. And working cartoonists, we aren't just drawing from the heart what we feel. Oftentimes we know we're lying. We know when we're skating past where the actual realistic truth is. And we're not just simplifying, but we're changing the way that it is in real life. And we're doing that because it works and it's necessary. And we've learned that it works and it's necessary to communicate something and to get past your little broken brains. In order to sort of tell one larger truth, we're telling a lot of little lies. And I'll give you an example. I was training somebody who didn't work out as a caricature artist, but he was an engineer by trade and he wanted to learn how to do caricatures. And he drew a face, and it was passable. It was it looked a little bit like a bland mannequin, but it was a face, and we were using a photograph, a reference photo. And I said, well, the smile looks creepy and odd because here, let's do this trick here. And I drew the line under the cheek that pooches up the cheek into the eye. Now you can probably see that line on me because I've got a fat face, but generally on people, you can't actually see that line. But when you're drawing a cartoon of somebody, if you leave that line out, it looks weird. And I drew the line in, and you'd have thought I did a magic trick for this engineer. He said, it looks more like him. And I said, yes, that's why I showed you how to do this. But the line's not there. I said, no, it's not in the photograph. You just drew a line that's not there, and you made it look more like him. And it
imagination.
Yes, that's an example of a little cartoon lie that helps the greater truth, because it gets past that. It goes into your little symbolic conceptual plane, and you read it as, oh, this is a genuine smile because I can see the cheek muscles pushing up. But even if it's not in the reference photo like that, it still helps with the drawing. So I blew his little engineer mind, and so certainly, don't take my word for it though. There's a ton of psychological experiments and studies out there, and papers you can read that have used reaction time to figure out if we humans recognize somebody faster from a caricature than just a plain traced photograph or basic portrait. I'll quote from Robert Morrow and Michael Kubovi in a paper for Memory and Cognition in 1992. Quote, although caricatures are often gross distortions of faces, they frequently appear to be super portraits. Ooh, super portraits, I like that. Capable of eliciting recognition better than veridical, a fancy word for truthful depictions. This may occur because faces are encoded as distinctive feature deviations from a prototype. In other words, the lie of caricature works best because in our minds, in our memories, we encode faces as how they differ from the norm, how they differ from the plain, bland mannequin face. So I'm just talking about cartoons here, but I'm pretty sure skeptics everywhere agree that if the lie or the exaggeration is easier to accept and quicker to recognize than the truth of things, well, we have our work cut out for us, because cartooning has showed me that people absolutely accept the lie or the stretching of the truth faster and easier than they accept the reality of things. And that's an underlying tenet of skepticism, if ever there was one. Now, lastly here, when talking about lying or bending the lines a bit, there was a cartoonist I want to reference here named Joe Teller, who was a pretty prolific cartoonist, and he was a painter and a working artist his whole life. And in a memoir I read, he was teaching his son about how to draw the table. And his son got out a ruler, and he said, "What the hell are you doing? Put that away." And his son goes, but the table has a straight line on it. And he says, no, in art, when a line looks straight, it's straight. End of story. And that just kind of is a nice little vignette that teaches you exacting truth is trumped by what looks right. Again, that's a battle we fight as skeptics constantly. And not surprisingly, that cartoonist's son grew up to be a skeptic, and he makes a living telling a different sort of performative lie than art. He is a magician out here in Vegas. He's the smaller, quieter half of Penn and Teller. Raised by two cartoonists, believe it or not.
Nice.
So moving on, we're going to talk about context and keystones. And I'm going to drop my, I said everything's going to go right as long as I don't drop one of these. And I drop one. Here we go. Context and keystones. You guys probably all know what context means. Another thing that cartooning and magic have in common is we use context. And context sells the lie or the simplification. People absorb a context. People aren't really aware that they're absorbing the context, but they use the context to figure out what they're expected to see in any given situation. The brain is a lazy, lazy thing, and especially when it's at rest, like it's probably at rest when it's doing something fun, like watching a magic show or reading a comic book or tuning into Goop TV on Netflix. So the path of least resistance is to accept something as the most logical thing it should be in that context. Like a self-help person in a lab coat kind of looks like a doctor, so you're going to kind of listen to their advice and your brain will kind of think, oh, this is in the context of good health information, so I'm going to listen to it. Now, this cartoon log looks like a log because it's in the context of fire. So, let me see here. What happens if we change the context around here? Let's take a look at this fire here, and it's just fire. Oh, I dropped my logs. We've got fire and we've got logs, but if I
that would be weird in another context, Celestia. I'm just saying.
I know, but if I change the context here, the logs can look like something entirely different in a different context. And this is a long used gag in so many different ways. I'm going to take that off because I don't want people tuning in to wonder why I've got that up there. Gross. It's just a little bit gross. I'm having a visual aid disaster here. It's a good thing.
I fully expect a wardrobe malfunction coming up.
You guys are just lucky I didn't bring in the puppets. All right. Contexts and keystones. Anyway, so context is everything, and people don't know when they're being led into context or when they're not. Cartoon-wise, I got to give a hat tip to Al Jaffe and his wonderful Mad Fold-ins. Do you guys all remember those, where it's one picture and then you fold it? You have point A meet point A and point B, point B, and then the same images you saw in a different context because you folded it now looked like something completely different. Mm-hmm. And again, Pareidolia is at work there, another skeptical concept. And skeptical investigators will talk about context in many different situations. Ben Radford, who you probably saw earlier, he's my co-host on Squaring the Strange. He will talk about context and social context until his hair falls out.
Oh, wait. He must have already talked about it a lot.
It's been a long-running podcast. We've got like 100 and something episodes here. And this is what I mean by social context is when there's a bump in the night and it's interpreted as a ghost in America. That same sound, just like the same pictures I was showing you, that same sound, if it was heard by some peasant in medieval Ireland, might be assumed to be fairies, or if you see if you see a ripple on the water in Loch Ness, you're going to think it's the Loch Ness Monster. If you see that same ripple on the East Coast right after you've seen the movie Jaws, you're going to assume it's a shark. Any number of things, from Japanese water spirits to lesser local cryptids, and we're talking about the blob squatch photographs, where if you saw the same sort of blurry dark image somewhere else, you wouldn't assume it was Bigfoot, but because it was on your camping trip and you heard a rustling noise, oh, this is a photo of Bigfoot. So skeptics are constantly trying to make people comprehend what context is and how our brains get fooled by context pretty constantly. I once was able to convince somebody of the fact that a ghost orb on their photo was actually just a droplet of water. And all it took was I just kind of cut the little droplet out and I moved it from one context to the other, much like I did with those logs. I took it from the spooky, dark photograph that she had taken on a ghost walk, and I moved it to a photograph of a waterfall. where there were a ton of other little droplets. And she said,
Oh.
oh. And it was like the scales just fell from her eyes. There was no denying it, you know, and I honestly, I felt a little bit bad because she was just instantly like, oh, that totally wasn't a ghost at all. That's a water droplet. So context can also be purposefully laid out and used in a sequential story. In fact, it's absolutely key to most sequential stories. Mad Magazine parodies, the Mad Magazine movie parodies, which I'm sure you've seen with the great caricatures. Tom Richmond has been doing them for like 20 years. They rely on what Tom Richmond has come to term keystones. Keystones. And keystone is kind of like a big flashing light of context. What he describes as a keystone is on a splash page, on like the opener of the parody, he'll have a really good, intense caricature of the celebrity or the movie character specifically that is going to be in the story. And you work really hard on that one. You get a lot of really good photo reference, and the audience can understand it as, oh, okay, that's Jake Gyllenhaal, you know, in Brokeback Mountain or whatever. And once they see that really good caricature of Jake Gyllenhaal, their eyes move along the panels to the lesser drawings of Jake Gyllenhaal. And had you only seen that one little lesser panel of him, like from the side, where, you know, the artist didn't use a great photo reference, but just had to draw a certain situation, you wouldn't automatically say, oh, that's Jake Gyllenhaal. You'd say, oh, that's a pretty boy looking guy with dark eyebrows and pouty lips or something. But you might not think, oh, that's absolutely Jake Gyllenhaal. But if you've just seen the keystone, then your mind is already like, that's Jake Gyllenhaal, that's Jake Gyllenhaal, and that's Jake Gyllenhaal. So they act as a bridge for the viewer to recognize that the same character in other panels is the one that you just saw the really good drawing of. Now, Tom uses quite a few keystones, and he says he kind of needs to because he's not Jack Davis. He said Jack Davis only used one. Just boom. You do a really good caricature on the front splash page, and then the rest of them were just cartoons. But Tom, you know, Tom being humble, as a lot of cartoonists are, he's like, yeah, I can't carry it off because I'm no Jack Davis, you know. But, and this little side note, if anybody really wants to learn how to draw hands and feet in a really amazing, funny way, you look no further than Jack Davis. His hands and feet are amazing. Anyway, back to keystones and why they serve that function of carrying the panels in between. These sequences that might not have been recognizable are put into context, and instead of being ambiguous, they're absolutely like, oh, that's Jake Gyllenhaal because I just saw Jake Gyllenhaal. And the context memory is what sequential art relies on, and it's also what a lot of 1-2 panel and gag cartoons rely on, and it's what a lot of memes rely on. And yes, I consider memes a form of modern yet oh so primitive cartooning, but that's a whole nother presentation. In a meme, and it can be a simple, like funny or a conspiratorial political meme, misleading meme, there's often 2 images, and the first image influences how you see the second image. By just setting up, hey, think about this, and now look at this, you're automatically primed to think, oh, those things, they are similar. Why, yes, Hillary is a part of the Illuminati. You know, well, maybe not something that extreme, but even superficially, it can sort of lead you along this path that is not completely correct. It's purposefully changing your observations of something. So, all right, if you guys are ready to move further down this cartooning rabbit hole, jumping from accepting a symbol, accepting a cartoon as a thing based on the context you see it in, I want to move us a little further and note that context can even make you think you see something that isn't there. And this has resonation in skepticism, because there's a lot of people out there seeing things that aren't there. It's an utter reduction of the symbol to nothingness, and it still pulls out meaning in somebody's mind. I'm not talking about a delusion. I'm not talking about a hallucination. It's the normal workings of the brain to fill in the blank space, to fill in the gaps. We rely on this gap filling ability all the time to perceive things, and cartoonists when we're studying how to represent things to viewers, especially in a sequential story, we rely on your reliance on it. Now, just a simple example of this, going back to Tom Richmond and how he teaches live caricature, one of the principles he uses is what he calls implied line. Teeth are a big problem for beginner artists, especially because if you completely avoid drawing the lines between the teeth, then all your subjects look like they've got a big mouth guard or some big blank white void in there, and it looks weird. If you draw the lines between the teeth, though, then everybody looks like they've got giant gaps between their teeth, and that's almost worse. So the way that Tom has solved this, or described how artists have solved it for years, is he uses this thing called implied line. He connects the gum lines and the bottoms of the teeth he doesn't even connect them. I shouldn't have said that. That's incorrect. He implies that they are connected by tapering them off right before they touch, like a stalagmite and a stalactite. And when you're looking at that as a viewer, you understand there's a line there, but it's so faint I can't see it. It's tapering off at the top, and it's a little notch at the bottom. And those are two separate things. I just can't see the line between them. And relying on what isn't there, like implied line between two teeth, can go even further and become the backbone of sequential art, or comics as we know them, when we're talking about the spaces between the panels, where something happens that you, the audience, does not see. It might be called the warrant of the argument. I think Ben has given talks about, there's this thing, and obviously that means this thing, but the space in between is the implied warrant. How do you get from there to there? Well, masters of the craft of comics and in movies, in motion pictures, have written tons of work on the between the panels space. Scott McCloud calls them the alchemy between the panels, or more broadly, he calls them closure. He calls it closure. Closure is what happens when you observe the parts, but you perceive the whole. And human beings love closure. We absolutely, it's our favorite thing to see little clues and to put them all together into something. From when we were little babies, figuring out peekaboo, oh, mommy's gone and now she's back. She never left. I figured it out. That's closure. And when you're a senior citizen reading a mystery novel and you pick up on the hints of foreshadowing and you know who the murderer is, that's closure. You're figuring out something from information that's not present. And some of the most powerful cartoon, this need for closure can go super too far when we see your cousin Jimmy on the internet, hearing about drips and drabs on YouTube videos and piecing it all together, man. He perceives the whole. Conspiracies out the wazoo. His need for closure has gone super cuckoo bananas. That can happen too. That's something skeptics are fighting against constantly. But some of the most powerful cartooning relies on this innate human desire and ability to find closure, to perceive closure, to understand what isn't there. And I'm not talking about negative space, which is the space between objects on a panel. I'm talking about absent space, the alchemy between the panels, or nothingness at all. And just a little aside here, I'm going to show you one of my absolute favorite uses of blank space in a graphic novel. Let me show you a sequence that took place in one of my favorite graphic novels called The Sculptor. And there's a pretty predictable sequence here where the young artist David, who wants his art career to go a little bit better, and an older man who sort of is a character that represents death, or at least somebody with life and death powers. He says, well, what would you give for your art? I'd give my life. Well, then, okay, hold on, let me show you something. And then the next page is that. And Scott McCloud is an atheist. I know this. I've talked to him. I've heard him talk at conventions, And, oh, what the hell was that? Oh, well, the human mind cannot possibly conceive of the absence of itself. And not many things give me the chills reading comics, but that blank page was very chilling when I came across it. So anyway, I highly recommend that graphic novel, but it's not a fun romp on the beach read. It's actually pretty heavy. It's figuratively and literally a heavy graphic novel. So moving from how we fill in the blank space to what goes wrong when we fill in the blank space. We're going to talk about, toward the end here, memory holes, ambiguity, and reference photos. Any artist who works from photos, and that's almost all of us, certainly the ones who draw portraits and caricatures like me, will tell you that camera angles lie. The same person can easily look like somebody else from one photo to the next. And likewise, two people who have just a passing resemblance can look like they're the same person depending on the photograph, if the lighting and the expression and the camera angle are right. Does anybody remember that book that came out about 20 years ago called Making Faces? It was a makeup book. A photographer and makeup artist named Kevin Aucoin, A-U-C-O-I-N. He took a bunch of celebrities and he used makeup and lighting, no Photoshop, to turn them into other people. He had Courtney Love posed up as Jean Harlow, and he had Isabella Rossellini as Barbara Streisand and Janet Jackson as Dorothy Dandridge. And actually the book is making a comeback. People who are stuck in their houses for the pandemic have been buying the book up and replicating all the looks that he has in the book, using their makeup and their lighting and their little tricks. And hey, one small example of people using their COVID downtime to learn that photo evidence is not always what it seems to be. So, you know, that gives me a little bit of hope out there, even if it's just people playing dress up with makeup and lighting. But I've tried to explain this on the podcast before in the terms of photos that are held up on the internet by believers in conspiracies about crisis actors and false flag operations, where they claim that the same person is in two images from two separate shooting, massacres. How can that be? And oh, look, this victim's relative, here she is here, and then here she is 2 days later. She looks like a different person. Ooh, conspiracy. Well, I mean, if you've worked with reference photos, as cartoonists do all the time, you know that, yeah, superficially, if you have a Caucasian teenage girl with long hair who's got her face screwed up in this like anguished, devastated expression, and you pull up another photo of a girl who's got long brown hair, who's about the same age, who also has her face screwed up in this anguished sort of expression, they can look like the same person to somebody who is not trained in what to look for. And I mean, if you've ever seen an animator work, they look at a mirror, and if they need to draw a dog or a cat or a dolphin or a turtle with a particular expression, they will make that expression in the mirror and use the mirror to draw the expression on the character, because your face does the same sort of things with its muscles when you make the same sort of expression. And certainly extreme expressions like anguish because you just witnessed a shooting, those are extremely extreme emotions and extreme expressions that pull everything back. And so it makes it far more difficult. Like, I would never draw a caricature or a portrait of somebody based on an extreme expression like that, because you can't tell what they look like underneath the expression. So making use of photos is not something that can be done superficially. You don't just glance at a photo and get a feel for somebody. For some reason, clients think that. They're like, oh, here's a photo of me from 10 years ago, and I'm not smiling in it, but just make me smiling, and I don't wear glasses anymore, I wear contacts. And no, you can't do that. You need good, good up-to-date reference photos to be able to draw something, and especially to be able to cartoon it. Now, speaking of cartooning and reference photos, everybody who drew a bicycle, pull out your bicycle. Let's examine what we got. All right, it's hard for me to see. I think you've done some right things here. Let's take a look at a real photo. This is what I would use if I was just using a reference photo for a typical bicycle. You got the frame there with the sort of the diamond shape.
Oh, there you go.
Not to the right. Forward and to the left, Angie.
There we go. Oh, okay. All right, so you may have put a little bit of extra stuff in there. Some of you got the details right, and if you did, congratulations are in order, because apparently people suck at drawing bicycles. Rebecca Lawson is a cognitive psychologist who specializes in how we perceive everyday objects. And she, as well as a few others like Kevin O'Regan, have suggested that the way our memory works, our lazy, broken brain memory, we just think we know what everyday objects look like. We don't actually know, because we use the outside world, the everyday world, as a constantly accessible Rolodex. We just kind of use, I mean, evolutionarily speaking, why bother spending the extra brain power, the extra energy to commit all of your everyday objects to memory so that you could draw them on the fly, when you can just, they're around you. You can see them whenever you need to understand anything about them. So that especially applies apparently to objects that have moving parts, and a bicycle certainly fits that category perfectly. So we just don't pay attention to how these things work. We don't, non-engineers anyway, don't pay attention to how a bicycle actually works, because it's right there, we can look at it. So in a paper published in 2006 in Memory and Cognition, Ms. Lawson chose a bicycle to do this clever test. It's an everyday object, and most people have ridden one or own one or have seen one. And she asked, first she had 64 subjects, and she asked them to, she showed them a simplified picture of a bicycle, just this version right here. You see how it's missing the bicycle guts? There's no chain, there's no frame, there's no pedals.
There are no tassels on the handlebars either. That's what I had in mind.
That's a vital necessity.
I'm just saying.
So she asked them to complete the mechanical part, and everybody who participated believed they knew what a bicycle looked like. It's not like they're like, well, I have no idea what a bike looks like. Everybody believed they could do this. And most of them failed. Most of them had some sort of fundamental error in the drawing that would result in a completely non-functional bicycle. She also, to make it a little easier, gave people the same sort of image with a multiple choice option, where you see there's different frames there, and you can choose which one is the correct frame on a bicycle. And people didn't fare much better with that either. They made different sorts of errors, but a lot of them, more than half, made some sort of fundamental error that would result in a bike that wouldn't work. So she amended her test by actually giving people clear instructions. She thought, okay, maybe they're just nervous about their drawing ability. So she said, I'm not interested in your drawing ability. I'm interested in how you understand a bike works. So think about the functionality of the bike. Think about how the pedals push the wheels. Think about how it all goes together and works, how it steers. And no effect. This had no effect. She gave the test to 94 additional subjects, and they still made huge blunders. In fact, she got more errors in this batch of people than she did percentage-wise with the first batch of people who didn't get any instructions. So she repeated the test with cyclists, people who were in bicycle clubs who fixed bikes a lot, and they did, not surprisingly, they did much better. Only a few errors. And then she tested regular folks, but she gave them a bicycle. She didn't give them a bicycle, it wasn't like a sweepstakes. She had a bicycle there that they could look at as reference. And when they had reference to look at, they did just as well as the people in the bicycle club. So that shows you that nobody's going to be an expert on everything. You need references. The best quote of the experiment, in my opinion, was one subject who exclaimed, I never knew how little I knew about things until I had to draw them. Yeah, no kidding. I remember what I said. If you want to teach critical thinking to kids at a young age, get them an art lesson. So it's a gateway to having humility about your own perceptions. And remember how I said that studying psychology and studying art, especially, the tricky parts of psychology that skeptics like to know, they seem to be kind of parallel tracks. Well, independently, without knowing that this psychology experiment went on, an Italian designer named, oh, I love saying Italian names, Gianluca Gimini, has for several years carried out a project he calls Velocipedia. Now, he finds it beautiful how people mess up bicycles. He goes, nobody can draw a bicycle. Well, I'm not going to make a terrible Italian accent here, but he said, nobody can draw bicycles, and it's beautiful seeing the way that they mess things up. And he's got a collection of hundreds and hundreds of little ways that people have drawn bicycles, and his are a bit more freeform, because he didn't give them a framework, a basic wheels and handlebars thing, the way that Ms. Lawson did. These are all just, he would randomly walk up to people, hand them a pen and a piece of paper and say, draw me a bicycle, please. I'm amazed he got as many people as he did. But he's a designer, and he 3D rendered some of these amazing beasties. And there's like one with, you see the chains going around the front of the wheel and the back of the wheel.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, what a monster bike. So yeah, it's reminiscent of when you see an artist take their kids' goofy drawings and turn them into highly rendered things. But and by the way, I drew a gift caricature just a couple weeks ago of a couple on their tandem bicycle. And first of all, I absolutely needed a good photo reference of their tandem bicycle. And when I posted the drawing just on my social media, a lot of my non-artist friends said, oh, you captured them, it's so beautiful, I love it, it's cute. And all my artist friends said, oh, good job on the bike, bikes are hard. I hate drawing bikes.
Oh gosh, well done.
That comes to the very last thing here, and that is, real quick, I want to talk about how cartooning taught me that when people don't understand something, it's magic. Being a caricature artist where you're working like live at events or at state fairs or festivals, back in the before times when we had those things.
I remember that.
Yeah, you hear stuff behind you and you see how people are perceiving how you're drawing the art, how the art is forming. And often people can't perceive it until the final stroke is in. I can draw a perfect drawing of somebody's face, but until I get the hair in there too, people are like, I don't know if it looks like them. I don't know if it looks like them. And you finish the hair. Oh, wow, that looks just like them. It's like magic. Because they're unaware of how the other things look until the whole is visible. They need the context. And the other thing I hear constantly, and not to brag on myself, but every artist hears this, even the crappy ones hear this. Oh, it's a God-given talent. Oh, look, oh, you're so lucky. They never ask, how did you learn this? They ask, how did you discover you had this talent? How did you you don't discover you had a talent. You discover you have chlamydia or something.
Because they're roughly the same.
You don't wake.
They're roughly the same. So
you don't wake up one morning and said, "Oh crap! I slept with that artist, and now I have art ability." No, as I said earlier, it's a long, painstaking effort to attain the observational skills that allow you to cartoon in a way that the general public labels as talented.
But hopefully you burn less when you pee.
Yeah. So and trying to explain this to people has been kind of like skeptical practice my entire career, because I oftentimes I just nod and keep drawing and collect their money. But, I had a woman walk by with her 3 kids one time, and she hurried them along because they all wanted to watch it. She goes, come on, you're not going to be able to learn how to do that. You got to be born that way. And I'm like, no. Nobody's born this way. If your kids have the interest, and if they put in enough practice, they will get good at drawing. I guarantee it. And when I explain this to adults, when I have them sitting in the chair for 5 minutes, and I say, no, this is a learned thing. This is like ballet or, obviously not all of us are born with the rib cage and the wingspan of Michael Phelps. We're not going to all be Olympic swimmers. But when it comes to a technical skill like art or engineering or something, you can learn it. Yeah. And I explain this to people and they go, oh yeah, But really, I'm born with it, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Celestia. I'm going to give you about 10 seconds for a shameless plug because we're out of time.
Oh, well, I've run out of time to show you all the wonderful books by other people. Here's my information right here.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many, many skeptical books you can get. There's Tom Richard's book. If you buy it from his website, it's under $20. Tell him you know me. You'll get probably a signed copy. Scott McCloud, Understanding Comics. If this is too light for you, there's How to Read Nancy, which is really, really in-depth on comic theory. Daryl Cunningham, How to Fake a Moon Landing, Science Tales, exposing the myths of science denial. There's a bunch of cartoonists doing good skeptical work out there. Zach Wiener-Smith and...
Okay, I meant you. Okay, but you were first, so thank you very much, Celestia. You definitely need to come back, if nothing else, to give us all those wonderful references. So thank you for joining our live streaming Skeptic Track. We'll see you. We'll see you next year, I hope, in real time. If not, we'll see you on our next episode. Bye-bye.
As fun as all this streaming content is, we sincerely cannot wait to see you all in person again next year. Remember to stay healthy and safe until then. Wear a mask when interacting with other people out in the real world. Want more Skeptrack? Get more than 10 years of Skeptics Track programming at our video archive, video.skeptrack.org.